The letter had been folded and unfolded so many times that the paper had grown soft, the ink smudged from rain and trembling fingers. It lived in the breast pocket of Corporal Thomas Hale's uniform, close enough to his heart that, if a bullet came, maybe it would stop it. He told himself that every morning before dawn, before the whistles blew and men climbed from trenches into fire. "Still got that letter, Hale?" Sergeant Murphy called from down the trench, his voice rough from smoke and sleeplessness. Thomas nodded. "Aye, keeps me warm." Murphy chuckled darkly. "Hope love's bulletproof." Thomas smiled faintly and ran his thumb along the envelope. The name on it, written in elegant script, had faded, but he didn't need to read it to remember. Clara Bennett, the girl with chestnut hair, a laugh like sunlight, and eyes that had looked past the uniform to the man beneath it. They'd met in a library before the war. A quiet afternoon, the smell of paper and rain. He'd dropped a book, she'd picked it up, and their hands had touched. It was simple, unremarkable, and yet it had changed the shape of his world. Now, 2 years later, that moment lived only in the ink on that letter. He hadn't written her in months. There was no point. The last mail convoy had been bombed to ash, and the postal clerks said the lines were collapsing. But she kept writing anyway, somehow. Her letters came like ghosts, carried by men who swore they were lost and then found again. Each one began the same way. "My dearest Thomas, I hope this finds you alive." It was October 1918, and everyone could feel it. The war was ending. The air carried a strange stillness, like the world was holding its breath before waking up. But on the Western Front, peace was just another rumor. Thomas sat in the mud, polishing a rifle that no longer gleamed. Around him, the men spoke in low voices, about home, about food, about women who might not be waiting anymore. The wind howled through the shattered trees, carrying the smell of rust and rot. Private Allen, the youngest of the group, no older than 17, nudged him. "You think we'll get home for Christmas?" Thomas looked at the boy, too small for the uniform, too big for his age. "Maybe, if the generals don't find another reason to keep us." Allen smiled weakly. "My mum says God's watching over us." Thomas stared at the grey sky. "If he is, he's gone deaf." A shell exploded in the distance, shaking the ground. The men ducked out of instinct, though it was far off. The noise rolled like thunder, then faded into silence again. War had taught Thomas that silence was worse than sound. Silence meant waiting, and waiting meant dying. He reached for the letter again, pulling it from his pocket, smoothing the creases. The words were faded, but he could still see the last line Clara had written. "When you come home, we'll plant the garden again." He closed his eyes and could almost smell it. The earth after rain, the jasmine she'd kept near the window. He could almost feel her hand brushing his. And then the whistle blew. The attack came at dawn. Thomas barely remembered the orders. Something about taking a ridge, holding it for the French, pushing past the river. It didn't matter. Orders were just words. The field decided the rest. He climbed the ladder with mud-slick boots, the world erupting around him. Gunfire cracked like lightning. The air turned to smoke and screams. Men fell without sound, swallowed by the chaos. He ran. He didn't think, didn't breathe. Just ran through the fog, rifle clutched tight, heart hammering. Somewhere in the madness, Sergeant Murphy's voice bellowed, "Forward! Don't stop, lads." But then a shell landed ahead. The ground opened, dirt and blood showering down. Thomas was thrown back, his ears ringing, the world spinning. When he woke, the ridge was gone. Smoke curled up from shattered trees. Bodies lay scattered like broken dolls. He tried to move, but pain shot through his leg. Shrapnel. He looked down and saw the torn fabric, the blood seeping fast. His hand went instinctively to his pocket. The letter was still there. He laughed bitterly, coughing on dust. "Still got it, Clara." Guess you were right. All around him, the world burned. Yet in that fire, he felt something else. A strange calm. The end, maybe. Or peace, finally finding him. He tore open the letter one last time, his blood staining the paper. His eyes blurred, but he read the words anyway, whispering them into the wind. "When you come home, we'll plant the garden again." He smiled, even as darkness crept in. 2 weeks later, the war ended. Armistice was signed on November 11th, and the guns fell silent for the first time in 4 years. Men wept in the trenches, bells rang in cities far away. The world exhaled. In a small English village, Clara Bennett stood by her window, holding a teacup gone cold. The postman had come hours earlier, his face pale, his words soft. She didn't remember much after that. Only the sound of paper tearing, the sight of a folded flag, and the single letter that fell from the envelope. It wasn't from Thomas, it was from Sergeant Murphy. "He kept your letter with him to the end," it said it reminded him what we were fighting for. When he fell, he was smiling. She read it again and again until the ink ran under her tears. That spring, when the fields turned green again, Clara planted a garden behind her cottage. She filled it with jasmine and white roses, the kind Thomas had loved. Every morning she watered them in silence. Every evening she sat among them, the breeze carrying whispers of faraway thunder that would never return. And in that quiet she swore she could feel him there, in the scent of the flowers, in the warmth of the sun. Alive at last. Winter came softly that year. The frost crept along the cottage windows, and the world grew quiet again. Too quiet, Clara thought. The kind of silence that made you remember. The town's bells still rang every Sunday for the fallen. Sometimes she'd walk to the edge of the churchyard, where rows of small white crosses marked names she didn't know. She'd bring flowers, not because anyone asked her to, but because she felt she had to. The world had taken too many names, and someone had to remember them all. Her hands were always dirty now. From the soil, from tending to the garden Thomas had promised to plant himself. She never let it wither. Even when the cold bit at her fingers, she'd whisper as she dug, her voice soft and steady. "For you, love," she'd say. "For what you left behind." Sometimes the wind would move through the jasmine leaves just right, and she swore it carried his laughter. In the spring of 1919, a train whistled through the hills, carrying men home. The station overflowed with families, mothers clutching children, wives gripping telegrams with trembling hands. Every arrival was both a miracle and a wound. Clara went once, only once. She stood near the back, her scarf pulled tight against the breeze. The platform was chaos. Cheers, tears, the clatter of boots on wood. She searched every face, knowing she wouldn't find him, but hoping she might see someone who had. And then she did. Sergeant Murphy. Older, limping, his uniform frayed but clean. His eyes caught hers immediately. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he removed his cap and walked to her slowly, as if the ground itself might give way. "Miss Bennett?" "Yes." He swallowed hard. "He spoke of you often." Toward the end, Clara's voice trembled. "He suffered?" Murphy shook his head. "Not long. Quieter than most. He went with your letter in his hand." Smiling, even she closed her eyes, the words both breaking and healing something deep inside her. "Thank you, Sergeant." Murphy reached into his coat and handed her a small object. A dented silver lighter, engraved with initials. "TH. He carried it always," he said. Said it reminded him there was still light somewhere. Clara's breath hitched. "And now?" Murphy looked out toward the horizon. "Now it's yours to keep lit." That night, Clara sat by the window, the lighter in her palm, the flame flickering faintly against the dark. The garden swayed outside, alive with night wind and moonlight. She took out a sheet of paper, her pen trembling over the page. For the first time since the war began, she wrote, "My dearest Thomas, I hope this finds you at peace. I planted the garden. It's beautiful. Wild, a bit stubborn like you. The jasmine bloomed early this year. I think you'd like that. The world is quiet again, but I still hear you sometimes. In the rain, in the soil, in the soft hum of life returning. You once promised you'd come home when the war was over. I suppose in some way you did. Yours always, Clara." She folded it neatly, sealed it, and tucked it inside the locket she wore. She never mailed it. Some words, she decided, weren't meant to travel far. Years passed, and the garden grew wild, ivy curling around the fence, roses reaching for the sky. The village changed. Children who'd been born during the war now ran through the fields without knowing what silence cost. Every armistice day, Clara would stand by her window, the same spot where she'd once waited for the postman. She'd light the silver lighter and let it burn until her fingers warmed. Neighbors often said she aged gracefully, though they didn't see how the weight never left her eyes. She never remarried. Some loves, the villagers whispered, don't end. They simply take root. And they were right. Decades later, a young boy wandered through the old garden behind the cottage, now half covered in ivy. He was a historian's apprentice, part of a group cataloguing local war memorials. He found her journal there, wrapped in cloth, tucked beneath the soil near a jasmine bush that refused to die. Inside were letters, all written by Clara to Thomas, never sent. The final entry read, 50 years gone, and I still see you in the light. The war ended long ago, but love never did." The boy closed the book and looked at the garden. The jasmine was blooming again. The scent carried on the wind, soft and warm, as though time itself remembered. He smiled faintly. "Rest easy, Corporal," he whispered. She kept her promise.